Present.
Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Lyons.
Present.
Commissioner Nordin.
Here.
Commissioner Zur.
Here.
Commissioner Pika. Commissioner Clements. Commissioner Clements. Hear us?
Present.
Thank you. Our first order of business tonight is to adjourn to closed session. I would hear a motion to adjourn to closed session under State Statute 19.851E and 1G.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Terry, if you would please conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Farrar.
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin.
Yes.
Commissioner Zur. Commissioner Pika.
Yes.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned to closed session. We will reconvene at approximately 7 p.m. Of Allegiance. Tonight's Pledge of Allegiance leader is Tony Woodruff, a 7th grader at DeLong Middle School. Her parents are Andrea and Tony Woodruff. Tony has been reading the announcements and saying the pledge at DeLong every morning since the start of the school year. Her favorite subject in school is social studies because she says Mrs. Udelhoffen makes it fun. Outside of school, she plays volleyball and is in Aikido, a Korean form of martial arts. She is hoping to test for her blue with brown stripe very soon. Thank you for being here, Tony. Those of you who are willing and able, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Tony. We'll now move to the adoption of tonight's agenda. I would hear a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Our agenda is adopted. At this time, we'll move on to our recognitions for the evening. Tonight is a bittersweet recognition meeting every year. Tonight, we say both thank you and, I guess at least for a while, goodbye to our student representatives. I'll turn it first to Superintendent Johnson, then I'll have a few words to say, and then we'll give each of our student representatives the opportunity if they would like to share some words with us.
Thank you, Chair Nordin, board members, student representatives, and guests this evening. As you realize now, when we have recognitions, I'm not reading from a script. It's really easy to talk about the three of you after what we've all experienced this past year, and I think it's been very noteworthy. I think last year's group of student representatives would somewhat feel the same way, but just so pleased that you were able to be here in person this year. Samuel, first of all, I really appreciate all the time and effort you had spent. Typically, the public may not know this, but at 6:15, most board meetings, I have a little bit of time, 10 to 15 minutes to talk with our student representatives about things that are going on in school, things that come to their concern from the student body, not necessarily for their own individual interests, but things that their classmates and maybe they may hear from staff as well. So that's a great time. And I'm sorry I was not able to participate tonight because we had closed session. But first of all, Samuel, thank you so much for representing the virtual school. Aislinn, to speak about you a little bit, so Reed, just wait, your turn is next. And Aislinn, don't worry, I'm not going to embarrass you, but I really appreciated this year when I think we had a couple meetings in September, and you and I and Principal Oldenburg spent a little bit of time, and you were able to, all three of us were able to speak and just to listen to each other. And you had shared with me, as had Principal Oldenburg, every couple of weeks you would get together and discuss certain things. And I thought that was really helpful. And your note taking and the thoughtful questions that you've asked, I'll really miss you a lot. And Memorial's got a really good thing going with you as a student over there, and continue that leadership. And Reed, the same holds true for you. Very proud. Congratulations. I can't wait to shake your hand next week at graduation. What you've shared with us through the OEs and the Rs this year, and your thoughtfulness and your questions, and the ability to meet at North High, every Wednesday or Thursday whenever I can get there on time. And there are a couple North staff who kind of wonder, is he the assistant superintendent? You're spending a lot of time with him. But anyway, I'm saying that in jest, but it's really, I'll miss you next year. Best of luck to you and your future endeavors. And anyway, just a pleasure to meet with all three of you and what you've been able to accomplish this year and what you've shared with us and shared with me and Kim Kohler as a group of very informed, engaged advocates as students. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll say on behalf of the board, also, thank you. Thank you, Aislinn. Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Samuel, for the work that you've done this year. I'm sure that Dr. Bika can attest to the work that we've all done together to try to help redefine what the role of the student representative means in our new governance system. I think I've seen, I think I've gained so much from each of you throughout the year as a board member because of the way that you've participated. Not simply just sharing the events that are going on in your schools, which are obviously, fun to hear about, but really digging in and asking insightful questions about the actual work that the board is doing and the function of the district. Aislinn, you especially, I think, really getting to the heart of matter and looking about how can I take this back to students or to the administration at Memorial. My son goes to Memorial, as you might know, and seeing you want to make that school better for everybody is emotional for me. Those of you that are in the public don't know, Aislinn is friends with my son, and so I feel like all my son's friends are very special to me. So I will try not to be so emotional for you, Reed, who I've just gotten to know this year in this role. But what I've really appreciated about you is the way that you have really dug in and challenged and worked to help us help you be better. You pushed us early in the year. How can we get this information earlier ourselves so that we can be better prepared? And that work, I think, has made us better as board members, has made the administration better, and will make it better for future. Your passion for our OE3 climate commitment is evident, and I look forward to, as we continue to refine that plan and bring it forward at the next in the fall. I know how much you've put into that, and that means a lot. You've taken this seriously and really put a lot out there. Samuel, I think I saw most from you as we worked to redefine the role of the students, and your insightful questions in some of those meetings that we had with the three of you and Dr. Bika and myself to look for ways to make these things better. And the way that I could tell that even though you've attended every meeting virtually, the three of you were able to collaborate to bring those things forward. And as the first representative we've ever had from the virtual school, you've set a really high bar for the future. So thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you, all three of you. I think we will continue to refine the role, but you've really brought the student representative into a much more active role in participating in the discussion and the thinking. And I know several of the board members have said to me that they appreciated your comments in the board meeting and the way that you've approached this. So thank you very much. At this time, I'll give each of you a chance to say a few words. I know that I know for sure at least that Aislinn and Reed have something, and Samuel, I'll give you a chance. I'm going to work left to right, and Samuel, you may not know this, but your screen is just to the right of Reed, so you'll be third. Aislinn, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for the thoughtfulness of that. That was not something that I was expecting tonight. Thank you. I am going to read off the script because I don't want to miss anything. This is really important to me. So firstly, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to make connections within my community and my district and my school. And it's been really incredible to talk to everyone here. I admire all of you very much. And it's been really cool to learn about how to be a good leader and, more importantly, a good person. I see all of you being good people just in your jobs, and that's something that I strive to do in the rest of my life as well. And I know Mr. Oldenburg sometimes watches these meetings, and if he is, thank you for spending all of your Fridays with me. You are one of the most important parts of being a student representative to me, and just the help that you've given me this year has been absolutely crucial. And genuinely, you just are a good person, and I thank you for that. And I like that I got the chance to participate in parts of democracy that I didn't even know existed. This is really cool. And I admire each and every one of you for remaining human in a job that demands so much of you. It demands that you give so much of your emotional attention that Like in meetings, I could feel myself like slipping into nothingness, just looking at bar graphs. But then like someone would offer like a really insightful question, like Commissioner Lyons would go, interesting budget point. Marcel would offer like a really insightful and sarcastic comment and it would make all of us laugh. Or you would like ask such a simple question in a way that was so deeply empathetic. Like I can tell that every single one of you cares so much about the people that you're serving. And that is amazing to me. I watch you congratulate and appreciate each other, and it's made me so grateful to be part of this team. Of course, there are some things that I wish were different this year, even beyond COVID and beyond public outcry. I struggled, along with my peers, to define what our mission was and what our reason to be here was. And that made doing the job that we were here to do in our minds very difficult. I applaud you for taking the initiative to change your board for a better system, but I can't deny that it did leave us behind a little bit. Just not knowing what our role was made it incredibly difficult to do anything at all for at least the first few months that we were here. I think constantly it was a struggle to be listened to or to be taken seriously. I know that wasn't your intention because I know that you really do care about everyone that you serve. But every year you have the opportunity to hear from the people who are most affected by the decisions that you make. And this year it just felt like those were the people that you asked the opinion of the least. I wish that had been different. I'm excited to aid the representatives of next year, and I'm excited to see you aid the representatives of next year in ways that I wish I could have been, and I know that the rest of them do as well. I hope that can be easier and smoother and more involved for all of us. I always viewed this position as a privilege for me and an honor. It's really an honor to be here with you and to learn everything that I have, but this position to you is an integral and necessary part of this board. I think it's absolutely necessary that you continue to make strides to improve the mutual communication between yourselves and the school body, the student representative. And I know each of you has taken great pains to allow immense compassion to seep into your work here, and I admire that. This field rarely gives you the appreciation that you rightly deserve for such difficult work, but I am so grateful that I got to be here. That's all.
Thank you. Agreed.
Having done forensics for 4 years, I'm going to give the speech I wanted to give the first time delivered standing. So, first of all, hello, board members, limited audience tonight, and those of you watching virtually. This representative position has really been trial by fire. When we got into this, not even the board, frankly, knew what the heck was going on. We all figured it out together. And even at the end of it, all of us are still willing to speak to each other, which frankly, I think is a small miracle. There's been a lot that's happened in the past 10 odd meetings that I've been able to make. We've had a lot of feedback from the public, and we've even had some disagreement of our own. There were struggles in the beginning, but the challenge, at least for me, was a meaningful one. I feel privileged to have had this opportunity, and although it may not have gone as smoothly as any of us may have hoped, I think it was worthwhile for the learnings it gave us. That doesn't mean any of us are done yet. Each of you still have at least another year to go, and at least for both of us, we still have unfinished business. So while today may be the official goodbye, we still got more work to do, and I look forward to the last couple of messages I send with all of you. It's been an honor to serve with each of you, and having seen what goes on behind the scenes and the truly incredible amount of emotional and physical effort it takes to do this job, I'm proud to have served beside you. Thank you.
Thank you. Samuel, if you have something that you'd like to share with us.
I just wanted to say that I found the most success and pride in the fact that we put so much work into the future of the next student representatives and recognizing the fact that their experience will be as good as ours and possibly better because of it. And even though I'm happy and excited about that future, I also am happy about the present, about how we've gone through all these tasks and gotten to this point. And to build off of that, I'm very happy about the past and reflecting on the relationships we've built along the way with all of you. Even through small meetings, you feel this unity between everyone. And so I'm just really happy about our success in the past, our success today, and our success is impact on the future. And I'm very thankful for being allowed to somewhat support the board and really be able to view it from this mix between student and participant per se of the board. Thank you.
Thank you. So for our student representatives, we have a certificate and a gift of appreciation from the board. So if all of you would join me in recognizing our student representatives, and then we'll meet you up front for the picture and whatnot.
Well, after a year of being in the background, I'm glad to finally get the foreground.
Yeah.
Samuel behind, you guys want to turn that way and get Sam behind you?
So yeah, if we turn this direction, then you can catch the screen with Samuel and keep us moving, just slowly.
There you go, slide in.
Yeah. I think it looks,
By your side.
all right. Samuel smiling too. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Got it. Thank you.
And Samuel, we'll make sure that we get your gift delivered to you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your
Thank you.
service. I'll leave this.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item is our public forum. The board provides those who sign up to speak 4 minutes to address the board. The board does not hear personal complaints about individuals connected with the school board or the school district. Tonight, our first, when you come up, please, for the record, state your name and address. Our first speaker tonight is Barbara Redmond. Yeah, right there, it's just fine.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Redmond. I am here this evening to share my story. As I left college in December of 1990, teaching positions were a rarity. I was privileged to be offered a maternity leave position for the DeSoto School District with hopes of it potentially becoming a permanent position. During that time, life changed quickly and I was proposed to, which then brought me back to the city of Eau Claire. In the spring of 1991, my search for a teaching position in Eau Claire began. I heard over and over during this time that to search elsewhere. Eau Claire was the district you wanted to be in and needed to know someone even to get noticed. At that time, there were only a handful of positions and thousands, yes, thousands of applicants. I was fortunate enough to be hired for an emergency special education position for that year with hopes that then I could give them and show them that I was their best that they could possibly hire. Fast forward 31 years later. Now I here stand in front of you retiring after the school year. My career in Eau Claire has consisted of 27 years at Robbins Elementary, with 11 of those years teaching special education and 16 of those years teaching third grade. For the past 4 years, I have been dedicating my life to sixth graders at DeLong Middle School. During my time here, I have given not only my heart and soul to this district, but to the children and their families that were entrusted to me for their care and education while molding them as future leaders for tomorrow. You are not only looking at a teacher, but you're looking at a Golden Apple winner, a Target Walmart grant winner. You are looking at someone who served as the head coach of Memorial Swim and Dive team. You are looking at a middle school coach who taught volleyball and track. I've run numerous after-school programs, clubs, including Legos, first aid training, survival training for students, countless sessions of tutoring for students for enrichment, and for also giving those kids just that extra need. Throughout my career, I also worked on curriculum writing and worked in many collaborative projects with the university. I did not come here to toot my own horn, but to make you aware of the quality and dedicated staff like me that are here in your arms and in your hands at the school district. As I conclude my career, I would like you to know how your recent decisions have impacted me and those dedicated individuals still out there, while allowing the door to be open for them to be freely recruited from other districts. It's happening. I've sat at lunches where other schools have called. First of all, my decision to retire did not come easily. To be honest with you, I still have a passion and a love for teaching even after 31 years. My colleagues and mentors have asked me why. It's been during this time in Eau Claire that I've seen many things go away, from full insurance and state retirements covered to gradual increases in out-of-pocket expenses, pay freezes, pay cuts, astronomical insurance deductibles, and threats now of having OPEB and insurance being taken away. These are my reasons for retiring, not the passion or the love. As you sit here and ponder your future decisions, I ask you to think of the following. We as educators teach the core values on a daily basis. We challenge minds and build lifelong relationships with students. We are held to a standard of teaching, living those values of justice, compassion, honesty, courage, responsibility, and respect. During the past few years, I have attended numerous retirement insurance meetings when many issues and comments did not settle right with me. At 2 recent meetings in which there were no board representatives, retirees were referred to as only those 208 and those retiring this year that this insurance would affect. At another meeting, we were told that the district insurance changes were done transparently with all parties involved. When asked the question why the insurance numbers were not shared with the group, it was stated that it would cause panic and uproar.
Mrs. Redmond, I'm sorry, that's your time. Our next speaker is Tony Woodruff.
Distinguished board members, I'm not very eloquent or articulate, and I'm not a very good public speaker, but I thank you for each of your time and attention for allowing me to speak here and have my voice heard. Your protocol and etiquette demands that I don't get personal, but I do have to appeal to you that when it comes to the love and welfare of our children, it has to be personal. Now, I won't name names, I won't point fingers, but I will, if allowed, to tell you a story. I have a child that's in the schools. Actually, I have 3. So the one that gave the Pledge of Allegiance. But my older child, there was an incident in one of the high schools to where, and this incident went on over the course of at least 2 days. And in accordance with your protocol, I will not submit to you video evidence, but I will tell you that it exists. It certainly exists. Now, I'm a crop duster pilot. I fly very fast and very low. And it's a life or death with me to make decisions that if you don't take a small problem and correct it, then it becomes a bigger problem. And then it becomes life-threatening. Now, given the history of this nation in the past few years, the past decade or so with the school shootings, we have to address these issues in the same manner. you correct the problem at the beginning. If not, it will increase. And the quicker you correct it, the quicker it ceases to be one. Now, in this incident with my son, he was in a fight. And it lasted over 2 days. And with the video evidence, it shows, which is the nature of my complaint, the perfunctory attitude of faculty members. They did not report it. They reported it, and it would have gotten back to me or the other parent. We could have counseled our child. We could have figured out ways to avoid this. It did not have to, come to a physical altercation. There were several applicable laws broken there because they threatened me with going to the police. And after looking at the video, I suggested, and then they threatened me again with going to the police. We can just go to the police. I said, well, that's probably a good idea. Well, at that point, the upper echelon of the faculty backed down. And I'll say this because my son acted in strict self-defense. Now, in the effort to be in compliance with your protocol and etiquette, I won't get personal with this, but I will ask you, distinguished board members, to please look into the protocol of handling a fight. Because what happened, day one, this child stalked my child, waited on him to get to his seat, and he was skipping class. He had even been there. He stalked my child and got in his face for over 45 seconds before there was any faculty intervention. Okay, at which point, all he did was escort him back to his seat. Okay. Secondly, that same day.
Mr. Redmond, I'm sorry that's your time, but I will give you my assurance that we will follow up with you on this.
Thank you.
Superintendent will follow up, and I'll make sure that we report back to the board with that.
Thank you for your time.
And Mrs. Redmond as well, I'm sorry for we do have the 4 minutes. If you'd like to submit the rest of your comments or your full comments in written form, the board will accept those as well. Our next speaker is Mark Goings.
My name is Mark Goings. I live at E17450 County Road E in Augusta. And as I was driving here today, I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago. It was Teacher Appreciation Week. I think about I didn't know if there was a School Board Appreciation Week. And as I was sitting over here a little bit ago, I Googled it. And it was actually in October. But October in the life of a board was like 5 years ago. I want to thank each of you for engaging in this conversation. And this has been a most unusual, a most trying school year. We need people who can fully engage with their whole heart and look at the big picture. And I'm so thankful that we have the board members that we have. And hearing the conversation, in the public speaking here, those are conversations that we need to be able to have, and we need to be able to have that social and that normal discourse, where we can actually sit down and talk about things. And anyway, even though it's not October, I want to just thank each of you for your time spent. Times sitting out here and watching what the board is struggling with. Know there's times that I disagree with you on topics, but there's been times I've been rooting for you, and also know the depth of some of the stuff that you've been having to deal with. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public forum for the evening. At this time, we will move on to our regular reports. We'll go to Budget Development Committee as usual. Commissioner Lyons.
Thank you. Budget Development met on May 11. We continued a review of data, including some interesting information on comparisons on Wisconsin tax levies. We also had considerable conversation around future committee processes. One major action item from the May 11th meeting was that we did pass a motion to change the name and the purpose of budget development to the referendum committee. In addition, we discussed what that might mean for full board meetings to keep budget in front of us as an ongoing focus. And we discussed potentially needing to designate a time for budget at board meetings. We further suggested that this could be a topic during one of the board work sessions and that we designate a time perhaps a year from now to consider our actions and whether or not we keep the committee as a referendum committee or we decide to reinstate a budget development committee. And that is the end of my report.
Thank you. Terry, would you please make a note in our list of ongoing policy needs that we will need to then revise the committee's policy to affect that? And Commissioner Lyons, I'd like to ask that budget development find some time to just propose the language of how to change it from budget development to the new committee language and how you'd like it defined there in the coherent governance policies.
Will do.
Thank you. Our legislative liaison, Dr. Johnson, is not with us tonight, and so we will move on to our consent agendas. With each of the consent agendas, the board acts with one vote without discussion. The board has been provided background information for each of these items or has discussed them at a previous meeting. If a board member wishes to discuss any item, it can be pulled out of the consent agenda and voted on separately. Tonight's superintendent consent agenda includes human resources employment report, gifts in the amount of $6,208.07 for the period of April 1st, 2022 through April 30th, 2022. Payment of all bills in the amount of $4,687,459.60 and net payroll in the amount of $6,225,103.19 for the period of April 1st, 2022 through April 30th, 2022. Financial report, April 2022, and 5-year capital project bids. At this time, I would hear a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda. Moved and seconded. Terry, if you would please conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Farrar, Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur, Commissioner Pika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes.
At this time, I will remember for one of the first times to give the floor back over to Superintendent Johnson, who has an announcement after our employment report.
Thank you. After this evening's approval of the superintendent's consent agenda, I would like to announce a new administrator to the Eau Claire Area School District starting on July 1st, 2022. Misty Trowbridge graduated from Western Illinois University in 1996 with a bachelor's degree in special education. She also earned a Master of Science in Education Administration in 2013. She also holds 2 administrator licenses through the Wisconsin DPI, Director of Special Education and Pupil Services, and Early Childhood Adolescence Principal. She's also licensed in intellectual disabilities and specific learning disabilities. Misty began her teaching career with the Rice Lake School District, where she worked for 1 year as a special education teacher. She moved to the Chippewa Falls Area Unified School District, where she worked from 1997 to 2013 as a special education teacher. In 2013, she became the Director of Special Education for CESA 10 and worked in this role until 2018. Since then, she has been the Director of Student Services as well as the elementary principal for the School District of Thorpe. Misty will be joining the Eau Claire Area School District this July as the Director of Student Services. Welcome to Misty.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. This time we'll move on to the board's consent agenda. The board's consent agenda includes minutes of board meeting May 2nd, 2022, liaisons and committee assignments, and Prairie Ridge Head Start additional funding. At this time, I would hear a motion to approve the board's consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Because there's a funding item here, Terry, if you would do an additional roll call vote.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine,
Yes.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Pika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements.
Yes.
Okay, the remainder of our regular business meeting tonight is dedicated to board development. Commissioner Zur has been leading the drafting of a communication plan for the board in accordance with our governance culture policies. And we wanted to take tonight to have a chance for board members to discuss it and get some feedback and ideas on what we can do next and how to move this forward. And so, Commissioners, I'll turn it over to you and we'll go from there.
Just point of clarification, someone starting the discussion.
I think we just ended up landing on just having Terry take the notes here.
My best. Okay, I just want to make sure it works. Well, thank you all very much for the opportunity to the communication plan. So just a little background. This was began development last spring, sort of as the policies came into effect. There was a lot of, research obviously pulled from the books we love so much, and some additional links and reports and resources that the original authors of Coherence Governance have published, as well as looking at communication plans from other districts. Primarily, I think one that seemed to summarize sort of the goals of our policies was Sun Prairie. Obviously, I think we leaned heavily on them a lot in development of our own policies. So their plan was attractive. It was well laid out. It was both, I found it both articulate from a document that could be used internally by a board in the district, but also externally. So it was both educational for the public as well as very explicit for board members and what it was aiming to do. So really looked at infusing equity into the plan as well, of just being intentional in where and how we link with diverse groups. This was some personal work in leading the results policy feedback work during the fall of 20 and into the winter months of 2021. We formed a sort of ambassadors group that met to provide a lot of feedback on feedback and then outreach, sort of as Commissioner Clements called it, a grass top sort of approach to that, which I found very empowering and wonderful to connect with those members of our community. So that was sort of infused into the plan of it as well. In Sun Prairie's linkage plan, they make a big deal, and this also came through in some of the coherent governance sort of topics on community engagement, was making sure that board members were involved, all board members were involved all the time. And I know that there's some limitations legally with how we can do that. So that was definitely a point of concern in the development of the plan. However, really tried to, so that was some early editing between President Nordine and myself, was kind of pulling back from, all members being involved, but also really encouraging that we intentionally spread that responsibility out and encourage it as part of what it means to be a board member, and set it as a part of our culture. Another edit from initial drafting with President Nordine was sort of a phased approach for implementation, because it is a big lift. You'll see that some of the concern that comes forward with some of the activities is really the workload concern for board members, and especially considering that this would be new and an additional thing that we would need to lift. And however additional for us would just be the responsibility for future board members. So it's new for us. It would be part of the deal if you chose to serve on the board in the future. Also taken into consideration was a board member survey. We did, I want to say January 2021, 4 of 7 then sitting board members completed that survey. So all of that was sort of taken into consideration when developing the plan. So the goals really, we have governance commitments. We've talked about them. We know them. So it's really in fulfilling those. Also, I think to speak, I think Dr. Bika speaks to this a lot. Is how do we increase public awareness of what we do and make sure that we own that messaging out to the public so that it doesn't get misconstrued or misunderstood. Strategic points of engagement, again, sort of us being in the driver's seat of where we engage in and whose voice perhaps we really want to make sure that we hear, perhaps voices that we are missing in the process. So facilitation was something that came out heavily in some of the communication documents published by the Aspen Group. Facilitation outside of the board when engaging in large scale community groups, so that it's like annual meetings and those types of things is how are they facilitated, and the goals are established, and then a facilitator is really entrusted with that process so that the board doesn't necessarily have to, no one appears to be the boss. There's a mediator in between that's really working to get the goals of both the public and the institution heard in that process. So again, strategic two-way communication, I think, was really important and recommended in this process. And again, under engaged groups, how do we create opportunities and be intentional in connecting with those individuals? So again, concerns, challenges, workload, it is a significant shift. Another thing is I didn't really understand was the relationship to the calendar. How are they documented and scheduled? And looking at other districts in coherent governance models, like looking at their calendars, I didn't see their communication plans necessarily represented in their calendars. The community engagement section was primarily like referenda or maybe annual meetings, but not like everything that the board was doing was on that board work calendar. That's not to say that we couldn't do that, to be a little bit more organized and within our body, and to set that standard might not be a bad idea. And then if there's a strategic group, how are we recruiting those individuals? How are we advertising for those individuals? How are we selecting them? So I just feel like that piece can really get a lot on. So it's still a question for me. So we're just gonna start at the top. So you all had the link to the actual plan as it was written. You can see that the first part of the plan did have in it some of the language, so more for the community, like what the board's actual role in connecting with the community is. So the first couple paragraphs, first kind of page of that document is really educational, both for us and for folks who might read it as the document for the board. And I did take edits from both President Ordine and Dr. Bika. Some of those edits are still visible. I didn't want to accept anything or change anything until we all had a chance to sort of see that. But this was sort of something that shook out within all of the coherent governance model districts that I looked at. Some did it once every 3 years, some do it once every 2 years, some do it every year. It definitely suggested from the Aspen Group folks, this, and also in our board survey, this was something that number one just kind of came out. So considerations with an annual meeting, again, frequency, how long we do it, when do we start it? In the phased approach, we, due to the time of the drafting, COVID was still very up in the air. So it's in the later phases. So there was a phase 1 this year, phase 2 next year, phase 3. 23. So, no, 24. So I think we had it in year 2 or 3. So it definitely has, it got pushed. So facilitation, again, I think in a meeting like this, we would want a facilitator, and I don't know how we would do that. I mean, who would do it? Public Education Network comes to mind, just somebody we might be able to tap for that. And then how is it, I hate that I had to put the word committee on that document or up there, but I did it. And just again, so another thing that kind of shook out in when I was reading through some of the documents is that everything for communication is done in board meetings. So they schedule the next, every group is kind of like scheduled at the end of a board meeting, and there's a place during the board meeting where updates are given similar to budget development or legislative liaison. Again, how would we organize this? I mean, I'm assuming we'd have to start 6 to 12 months out from an annual meeting to make sure it was done justice and given enough time. Key communicator group, this was something that Sun Prairie recommended, also something that came out of some of the communication, articles and studies that Aspen linked to. So we kind of did this, which I thought was interesting. Like when I read it, I was like, oh, we just did that. So it was sort of affirming in our work that we did during the results policy work. So that felt really good. So the key communicator group is a small group of individuals that is recruited strategically from specific, subsections of the population where the board may feel they want to engage under engaged individuals or underrepresented individuals. And it's usually done quarterly. That's what Sun Prairie recommended. Again, it could be done more or less. And then board members would be assigned to that. Again, Sun Prairie's is all board members attend the key communicator groups, which that was originally how I had our communication plan written. But considering the legality of posting meetings, it was recommended to bring it down under the quorum, recommended quorum numbers. Again, recruitment, how do we keep a diversity, equity, inclusion lens in that work? I think one of the things that was really successful in the results policy feedback group was to utilize our connections out through our BEAs to see some kind of underrepresented communities present in our ambassadors group. And again, facilitation, who does that work? I think facilitation kind of gets less problematic the smaller the linkage group is, if that makes sense. Because I think facilitation is easier in a smaller group, but those larger group annual meetings, I think facilitation then becomes a really big question for us. Roundtable with family groups associations. Again, this is probably our family advisory council. This would just be basically an opportunity for us to sit down and actually just hear from those individuals. And again, we could facilitate it. It could be facilitated. It could just be this listening session. What are the goals of it? This was again in the Sun Prairie. And this is proposed, this got knocked down annually. Again, they did it, I think maybe biannually or quarterly in their linkage plan. And if we wanted to do any additional family advisory council or like parent organizations, we could include, SEPTA, we could include Hmong PTA. So there's, sort of infinite opportunities as far as sort of what types of family associations we look to include in that roundtable discussion. School ambassadors, this one I'm kind of excited about because I've been trying to get to all the schools this spring, and it's hard, a lot of hard work. And what the school ambassadors, I thought this was genius. Again, this was proposed in Sun Prairie, but basically every year each board member gets assigned to a school. It rotates. I think Commissioner Nordine proposed a schedule for how we, or like number, like how we would get those assigned. It's 3 to 4 schools, and then basically if there's a fundraiser or an event or a band concert or a something that would be great for the board to be present for, the school knows which board member to contact. It's an easy linkage point, and that board member then only, you know what I mean, rather than getting invited to all the things, we can really be strategic in how we make those connections, and perhaps I think this would actually be maybe perhaps more efficient use of our time. As long as, again, this is a thing, as long as I feel like we're all committed to doing this job in a similar, with similar gusto. So it's new for the schools. I think that would be, something that we would have to perhaps work with Director Kohler on, or Superintendent Johnson. When would we assign those? I mean, the reorg meeting seems reasonable. And again, that equal board member participation, what does that look like? And how do we sort of, the last thing we want is a principal being like, I invited my board member every time and they never came. So, that was sort of my concern there. These are the three other activities. So there was a chart there in the communication plan of the activities. City county connection. So this is sort of the evolution of the shared services committee, and this would be on demand. So basically assigned at a board meeting if requested by sort of another entity, another public entity that would ask for us to be involved in something. We would then, make discuss it in the board meeting, and then actually just assign someone to that role. With, again, update, a newsletter. So these last two, again, part of Sun Prairie's linkage plan, exists spotty in other districts, but really, I think could be highly effective in that owning the narrative of the board. And that's really why I included them, was because I thought it created a wonderful opportunity for us to educate the public on what it is we actually do here, and what we are working on, what we are responsible for, and what we are, looking to see in our work. So I don't know if the board has ever had a newsletter or a piece of a newsletter, if the board members have ever done that. So I don't know what the precedent is for that in the past, but it seemed an interesting and a perfect job for a board president. Not to assign any, that's not how things will get assigned, but just to say. And again, social media, so utilizing that platform of before and or after a school board meeting, sort of just to say, there's a school board meeting tonight at whatever time, and this is what we're talking about, in sort of a really easy, quippy thing, so that, the district kind of understand, or the district as a whole could sort of understand what it is that we are doing. And it would give the board sort of that speak as one voice, rather than perhaps, board members out on their social media platforms sort of talking individually, which of course they're allowed to do. However, just giving that sort of one voice, and not to give any personal goals of the board or personal feedback from the board perspective, but really just content only of agenda content would really be what that would be looking for. And I know that the city council has done this a little bit. There's one thing that's not on here. I don't know, the bullet point didn't quite make it, and I noticed it today, but there was a community connections repository, which this actually came out of the board. 3 out of the 4 board members that completed the survey had concerns about how we track connections at the board. We all have networks of people that we talk to. We all have things that we do, places that we go, moments where we meet people. We have certain conversations, and then 2 years later, we may no longer be on the board, and that connection is lost. So how do we keep so that this, there's some integrity of who board members were connected with, maybe somebody who is interested in funding music or interested in seeing more, again, like I'll just use the solar panels, right? Like there's a community connection that one of us has made. How do we keep track of that so that perhaps future board members and or administration can build on those relationships rather than losing them during board turnover? And so the repository was really like it could be as simple as like form, like a Google form or something that we all just, hey, went to this event, talked to this person. This was the contact information, and really just a way for us to log that. I think the concern with that one was, where does that go? Who has to keep that and inventory that and see that? And that was kind of the concern, but it seems like a really fantastic opportunity for us to make sure that the connections that are made for the good of all aren't just lost, So it was a fascinating idea. So that actually came up in 3 different ways in that board survey as like just a suggestion. And it came up, both 2 board members spoke to it as an administrators could also utilize it. So it could be board and administration collaboration. So that's the communication plan. And really, I guess, what would come next, and I don't know, but really feedback and direction from the full board on what we would want to do with this. And I'm happy to take anything from ditch it, it's terrible, get rid of all of it, to tweaks and changes, suggestions. And then really, like I said, it's been, I sort of drafted it with President Nordine in the background, answering questions and sort of assisting with resources and whatnot. And then, he saw it, had first eyes on it, and then Dr. Bieke had eyes on it. So really, who wants to be responsible for the next phase of development? I'm happy to continue working on it, but I'm also happy to pass it off or involve others. When would you want to see it again?
So first of all, thank you, Commissioner Zer, for continuing to lead this and for continuing to push on it so that we need to keep going on it. Obviously, sort of as Mark said earlier, it's been an unprecedented sort of year again, but your focus on this to help us to improve our communication is appreciated. As we go into our discussion portion, because we are running tonight as a meeting that has regular business rather than a full work session, I asked Commissioner Zer how she wanted to handle some of the discussion. So we are going to continue to just do our regular form of recognition to speak, with the exception that you'll have the floor whenever you need it, Commissioner Zer, to answer questions or to respond as we ask you questions. So I'll ask you to, just light your buzzer up, or Commissioner Clements. I will try to keep my mouse sort of hovered over your picture on my WebEx feed to see you unmute if you'd like to be recognized. For student representatives, we do have a draft of the plan, but it is very raw and has specific comments that we're not ready for the public. So that's why you haven't seen the actual plan in preparation, because it's not at the public level yet. But I think Commissioner Zer gave an excellent overview of some of the ideas. And for the board in general, this is certainly not, these are the things that we are going to do. These are ideas that Commissioner Zer has come up with and digging in and doing a lot of work looking at other plans, Sun Prairie to Forest, especially as she mentioned. But we do want feedback on, what are the things that we like? What are the things that we don't like? Certainly some of these things we could, sort of initiate immediately before we have a formal plan, in place, because they might be something that's easy to do. And other things may take some phasing in, or, like an annual meeting will obviously take a good deal of planning to do. So at this time, I will open the floor, and I'm going to start with our student representatives because they appear ready to go. And I think Representative Berg, your light was on before Representative Loken, so I'll put you next in line.
So I think it's a really cool idea to have multiple different structured things to implement like a really large annual meeting and then have smaller groups meet like more frequently and less facilitated. I just wanted to ask, like, what do you mean when you say facilitation? Like, would some of you be there and like be asking questions in a larger public meeting, or would you like train somebody else to ask specific questions and move conversation, like in a specific flow? Like, how would you envision?
Well, I think that, I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. However, having, seen really effective facilitation and been a part of, some leadership development in that way, I can say that what I would hope we would be able to do is determine ahead of time as a body what goals we're looking for, what specific things we are looking to achieve through those larger meetings. And then come up with a structure for how we not only meet our goals, but we also have a way to establish the goals of the public who come. And how we hear sort of in a collaborative way, here are the goals that we come to this, obviously as an annual meeting, here are the goals we come with, or the framework, again, a framework around sort of how we are going to, Chippewa calls it pillars. Like they use pillars as they're like, we're gonna, there's goals for this pillar and goals for this pillar and goals for this pillar and so they sort of hear from the public strategically in feeding what they call their pillars. So there could be, different ways that facilitator sort of organizes public feedback, but also can establish some really clear lanes so that it's not just, what you don't want is a free for all. You don't want board members who are interested in specific things and everyone has special interests and the community shows up and everyone's disorganized and chaotic. It does need to have focus. In Montessori, we called it, freedom and discipline. There has to be the discipline of the event and there has to be the freedom within the bounds of what we're looking to achieve. And obviously, as a board, we have limited capacity of what we are truly responsible for our public. And so my hope with the facilitator is that we really keep it focused on actually the work of the board, and can do some education so that things that are related to administrative work can sort of easily get, moved to the right lane, and hopefully not take the show, if you will, at those events. So I don't know, but that's why I think it does, and it comes highly advised that outside facilitation is advised for these types of things.
Representative Logan.
One idea and one concern. The idea is that student reps, as all of you are aware, have very limited responsibility outside of the scope of the board meetings. So my idea is to, within the communication plan, provide some way where there's an expectation that the student representatives are involved by facilitating some dialogue with the students. Having some sort of formal mechanism would be very helpful because, well, I believe both Representative Berg and I had an equal urge to communicate with students. The administrations at each of our respective buildings were differing in their support. So having the emphasis from the board means that there is equitable communication between each building that is consistent across years and doesn't depend on the initiative of the representative. As for my concern, I think it's amazing that there is such a board focus on getting feedback from the community. What concerns me is that some of the best feedback comes from within, and relying purely or nearly almost entirely on the superintendent leads to a bottleneck because he's got a lot going on, and facilitating communication between teachers or even students and the board isn't really, at least from my perspective, part of what he should be focusing on for the day-to-day. So I would also like to highlight that it may be important to have some dedicated channels to get feedback from teachers because they give you the most immediate feedback on how your job is truly going without the extra step of parents who don't necessarily understand the whole situation.
Yeah, so I agree. And I think one of the questions that I've had since sort of this draft has been out there, especially in recent months, is how do we, is this the place where specific board connections or are sort of defined as far as what our relationship to those groups is going to be? Example, the, association. Is this the place where we define what, how we are going to interact or how we, so I mean, that's the one, it's been a question that I feel has come up and I guess I haven't solidly come to an understanding of what that looks like, but I hear you and I think it has definitely crossed my mind and I have wondered if this may not be the place for that. Because I think it becomes then, there, like I said, there's a lot of ways in which the board engages in various interest groups. But again, staff is an incredibly important interest group. And so and students are incredibly important interest groups. So is it a place where we define what our relationship is going to be? Or is it simply a place where we outline sort of the channels with which we will make ourselves available in an organized way, and leave those things still to that sort of nebulous, we'll just keep doing it as it comes up. And again, that repository of, made this connection, went to this event, had this meeting, talked to these, folks, or had a conversation with, these two teachers. It could be anything. So I don't have an answer for you, but I hear what you're saying.
I have one follow-up
I'd
question.
like to, I'm just going to respond real quick, especially, I think that we, as a board, already have in many ways defined what our relationship is to the staff. And that relationship is in board superintendent relations, and it's our number one policy. The board's main connection to the operational organization is the superintendent. The board will direct the organization only through the superintendent. Now, that, of course, we all know teachers. Dr. Johnson is married to a teacher. We all interact with the staff. But our main focus within our role as board members is always to have the superintendent be the focus, and it creates an intentional bottleneck because the superintendent is the only employee of the board. Some of our other staff accountability in BSR 3, the board will never formally or informally evaluate any other staff member. Now, when we interact with staff, we don't particularly, I don't ever think of myself as evaluating them, but the more that we engage them directly or get feedback, the more it is a challenge, at least for us to remain back from that. And certainly even in my first year as a board member, before we were in a coherent governance or even developing it, we had discussions, among board members about interactions with staff or about issues with staff that were probably inappropriate for board members to be a part of. I think we pulled back from those things, but it was always having that tenuous relationship. And then beyond that, giving direction. I think, Commissioners, I'm sure when you show up to a school as a board member, there is some level of disruption even when it's planned, right? Because the principal will always come out to greet you or might take you to a classroom. And, I think those things are welcome. I see Principal Vang here. I went to Locust Lane to pick up my bracelets, but of course someone had to take me down to the room and the kids in the room. And I think that was really positive. They were so excited to show me those things, but it does cause a little bit of disruption. And it is sometimes hard when you interact with staff members, whether it's principals or teachers, and you say, oh, I'd like, wouldn't it be great? That oftentimes can feel like potentially direction or maybe individually taking on an issue that is also one of our commitments not to. So I think we obviously need to make sure that we have ways to get more feedback from staff. But I do want to caution us when we think about this, that this system intentionally puts it through the superintendent to keep the information flow there. And there's just a balance that we want to stay aware of as we go through that. I think it's a legitimate concern. I just want us to all be aware of how we think about it within the bounds of what we've put on ourselves. It's that freedom in the discipline of what we've said. So that's just my little response based on our policy we already have here. But the floor is still yours to ask whatever your follow-up or next questions are.
My follow-up question is, if not within this initiative, where is there a standardized process for getting direct communication from members of the district? Because without something standardized, it's very difficult to hold the superintendent accountable. And while I've spoken to Superintendent Johnson a lot, and I think he's doing quite well, position changes, and without a balance against this incredible bottleneck, I have a large concern for lack of accountability.
I don't, I mean, I think that the policies sort of, maybe Dr. Nordine, you could speak to a little bit more how the board policies relate to district policy as it pertains to, you know, staff communication and processes that they have in place, how that, you know, makes its way to the board. I think I did not see any evidence in any other district using coherent governance where relationship to the staff or even staffing groups was outlined in their communication policy. And I think that's not to say that we couldn't do that, but I think that it creates confusion. I think could potentially create confusion and make that, I think it could potentially be difficult to not direct. I think we could potentially violate our own policy in trying to create a structure for communication from the board to the staff. That would be my concern. I'm not sure that that's what would happen, but I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to.
The accountability that we have for this district is our policies. It's the 4 results policies and the currently 13, soon to be 12, when we combine the two, the OE 7 and 8. If the superintendent, and you know, welcome to me quoting our policies a bunch tonight probably, but BSR 5, the board considers superintendent performance to be identical to district performance. If the district is not living up to the operational expectations that the board sets, and then we are not making progress toward the results that we have set out, then the superintendent is not doing those things either. And so that's the accountability there. If the board is made aware of a piece that is falling through the cracks, then it is our responsibility as the board to add that to our policy to make that clear that we have that, if it's an operational issue, which it probably is in a staff thing, then to add that to our policies. So the accountability is there, and this is not meant to be set in stone. It is meant to be a living document. You heard me say tonight, Terry, we have to revise a policy that we need change as we go forward. So I think that's where the accountability lies. And I think the reason that you don't see that in other districts, and we modeled ours on many of these partner districts that we continue to look after, because that is the disciplined approach to that interaction through there. So I would say that's the, you know, and in this communication plan, we're really looking at, as you put in your presentation, is it GC 2.3C, right? Where we're specifically talking about how we communicate with the community. And this plan is meant to be the outward plan for what we're doing. So these are considerations, of course, that we need to grapple with, but this plan is really focused on that external. And of course, all of our staff members are community members, and they'll have opportunities there. Dr. Bika.
I might add, so I think, I don't know maybe the full scope about what you're thinking about, but where that would come up. So it's OE6, Personnel Administration. Especially, I think at the heart of it would be point 11, that, you know, an operational expectation is that the district has a system to measure the climate and culture of the district. So that's the way I think where it really comes out directly.
My rebuttal to all of these is going to consistently be that information still comes through the superintendent. Without an external channel, the accountability, no matter how many processes you put in place, still grows through the person who can create whatever narrative they use.
Thank you. Commissioner Lyons.
Should I turn this on or no?
It's really just a signal that the mic is in the ceiling, so that the light is all I need. And once I've seen you going for the light, it's already lit.
Okay. So as I've been reflecting on my time as a board member and engaging with the community, you know, a lot of times when the community's asking me questions, they're really in the weeds kind of things. When is the calendar coming out? Or the first football game is going to be at home. And half the time, I don't know the answers to this. I usually find out the answer for them and get back to them. And, you know, I understand that I'm a board member and that a lot of these things I ought to know, but they're so far in the weeds. And that's where I think sometimes the danger exists. Commissioner Beek and I today just had a very open and unscheduled, really, meeting with a couple of folks that are on the city council. And where I think this is really valuable is that we shared what we were doing and thoughts and where the district and the city and the county, where we might be able to collaborate, work together, and just share ideas. I think that's really beneficial, and I see that in your plan. I also like the idea of the school ambassadors. Where I think it gets dangerous is where you start going through those actionable. And it's very interesting, but then how do we turn that over to the folks that are in the jobs to be able to kind of hand that ball off and run with it? And I don't know where that line gets drawn. I do know that everything that I do as a board member really ought to be, you know, bottom up, where it's coming up to us, and anything that's going top down is probably something I probably shouldn't be that, you know, other than to say when's the calendar coming out and that it's a couple of weeks late. Or so those are my kind of cautionary tales. I think that we need more communication. I'd like to be out talking to more people and understanding what's happening and what they expect and what they think of the district, et cetera. And I think it's really important for how we think about the referendum and what the community really would support in bettering this district, the people in it, the facilities in it, the quality of education, and being able to tie that up into a mission and deliver it to you. So those are all the things that have been running through my mind as I think about a communication plan and, you know, what that might look like and what my individual responsibility would be. And yeah.
Just to add to that, it's kind of interesting where the meeting that both of you had today, I think we had the same people in the meeting at 1 o'clock.
I mean, I facilitated them connecting with both sets of people, so I'm not surprised that they had two.
So you were okay.
Yeah, they reached out to me and said, hey, you know, we have these questions. And I said, okay, well, this set of questions seems good to, you know, for Superintendent Johnson, and I needed an update. It was about the climate commitment. So I asked a couple of questions of you of just, you know, where are we on that plan? You know, and then they also said, well, we have some questions about referendum. And I said, well, that's much better for members of budget development. So I connected them with Commissioner Lyons. I think it was just calendar wise that it happened to get on the same day.
But I've learned over the past couple of years too, and does COVID have a little bit to do with it? Yes, but it's really been interesting with the referendum especially, and we talked about it quite a bit today in our meeting, was the March virtual meetings with different groups of people in the community. Didn't necessarily have students, children or grandchildren in the district. It was more, they're hearing more about certain parts of the referendum. They want to ask some questions. They have a passion for sustainability. And it was really helpful at 1 o'clock between 1 and 2 today, where these two folks had some more ideas to bring different people into the fold to help us. And I brought up your name quite a bit today, Reed, where we've been working on that. Reed's got a passion for that, actions with the city, but it really does help us. It seems to be like, with me now, it's like that first year and a half, I'm getting to learn and know some different folks in town, some people who really they've got the passion and then they've got the action behind it too. So it's a learning experience, but very helpful today and just kind of interesting. I didn't know you made those connections.
Trying to get that community ambassadors, being an ambassador to the community, I guess, when people were trying. Commissioner Clements.
Thank you, President Nordine. So I shared some of the recent comments about, what the role of the board members are in coherent governance. I think I get uncomfortable anytime that board members get inserted anywhere into having any sort of formal role in the communication chain of command, that it's outside what goes to the superintendent. If there's any other mechanism, it would be through an ombudsman or something like that, who is kind of the neutral third party that might have that other channel for that appropriate use. I do think that board members should be very involved in the community in terms of being advocates for the district and ambassadors of the district. And we hear from constituents many of whom are current or former employees, or occasionally from students, but not as commonly, who share us emails or provide public comment. And so that will always be that vector will always be there. But I think as soon as we have any other channels that come directly to or through board members, then I have a real serious problem with that, both in terms of coherent governance, but also because even if we weren't in a coherent governance model, we have each board member, who serves what, that it creates a power imbalance that's somewhat like a staffing, puts board members in kind of a staff position in terms of having certain privileged roles because they're in this channel or that channel, but not other channels. And they're the person who hears that particular thing from that group rather than the others. I don't think there's any such perfect model. I think, I understand why there's concerns about how communication is funneled through the superintendent, and whether, as Superintendent Johnson reminds us, can we trust, can we trust staff? It's not, it's not a particular comment about the superintendent currently specifically, but that's something that we must have, is trust but verify in performance, including communication. And I think that's core to the superintendent's role, is communication, especially in an organization this size. So, when we came up with this model initially, we weren't in coherent governance, and we were trying to wrestle with some policy related issues with how do we get certain community voices involved in creating these coherent governance policies and that we hold ourselves to. But now that we're here, I think if we want to entertain changes to the coherent governance model, then that's when we may create some sort of engagement process. But I want board members to be involved and be parts of the community, go to PTA meetings and things like that. But I think anytime that we make it a formalized process, I think we need to make sure that we're very clear about what these roles are, to make sure that we're not creating more problems in just what could be is I think a very virtuous mission in having better and more communication. I don't think anyone can argue that that's not a good thing, but I think we need to be very careful with that. Thank you.
So I can just say at the end of the community engagement plan, there are goals for the engagement activities that are outlined for the board. And I think that what you're alluding to, Commissioner Clements, is whatever our goals for in connecting with the community, it has to come back to our governance commitments, right? Like we don't violate, as tricky as that is, we don't violate that, right? I mean, we have specific outline goals, in advocating for our district and connecting these, connecting groups with the resources that they need. Again, right? Like, I don't know when the calendar is coming out, but here's the person you can ask, right? That sort of, and again, I guess one thing that's not on here, and one thing that's definitely come to my mind, and it's funny that it never made into any of these challenges, was what is the connection? And I didn't want in any place in this plan for there to be a suggestion of administrative support. You know what I mean? Like it is a tricky, how will that work? So that is a concern or a question, right? Of like, what will be the process for when we go and do this thing? And there's that one person in the back of the room who's like, the lunch stinks, and you're like, okay, well, here's the person you talk to about that. So how do we deal with the weeds, with the folks in the weeds, right? But I think it's definitely through just showing up and advocating for results that we, again, that how do we wrap that mission up? How do we hear from our community and distill that down into the mission for the Eau Claire School District? Not just what DeLong does so well or what Memorial does. And I have pride in being, flyer, and I have pride in, all these different, it's all about how do we as a board bring all of that together, make it the Eau Claire School District. I think that's our responsibility, is to hear through a lot of that noise, and to represent, what we stand for, out to our public. And so I think that that will be a challenge. Certainly a challenge.
One of our next steps tonight being feedback, I would like to maybe hear a little bit about what board members think about individual pieces of the program. Certainly not even the three of us that have already, worked on and looked at this plan a little bit more in depth, have ideas that every one of these pieces is the right way for us to go, or how, what things we should implement when. But before I start talking about a few of the things that I see on here, I just want to, Dr. Beaker or Dr. Farrar, are there any sort of initial comments or feedback that you'd like to give before we sort of shift gears?
For me, I felt I had so many comments going there that every time I look at, I should just spend some time listening.
Fair enough.
I think that the part that I'm most excited about is the idea of the school ambassadors. That seems like the most easily implementable. Yes, it's a time commitment, and that's a thing, and we'll sort it out. But I think that's the location where normal conversation will happen. And I think that when we keep saying this phrase, two-way communication, but it's always being managed in a way that feels inauthentic in some way, I think. So, the way that we structure public comment, we don't respond immediately. And there are lots of reasons why, perhaps, right? But there are times in public comment where perhaps we actually would want to respond, right? And we have to have a process, and we do it in a way that makes sense and that doesn't derail the work of the agenda. But if we're really honest about two-way communication, what that means is authentic conversation, of listening, of responding, of being responsive in a moment. And that doesn't mean I will solve the lunch, right? It doesn't mean I will solve the minutia of a particular complaint about something that happened. But it is about a relationship. It's about the ability for there to be an authentic relationship with people in the district, that they know that they can talk to us and that we will hear them in a really meaningful way, and that we would have conversations at events, that we would be present and visible, that we would listen to what they're thinking about and act like a human being. And I think that that's part of what our community is asking for when they're asking for more communication, is that they want to interact like a human being with us. And that they haven't felt that was the case in the way that they send an email into the ether, and maybe they send it to all of us, and maybe some of us respond, or who knows? Or they come to public comment and they say something important sometimes, right? They say something that matters to them deeply. And then we say thank you. And just there's a thud, right? And that's not, yes, maybe later we follow up. Maybe we we track people down and we write to them. But there's something missing in those moments. And so that's why I think that the school ambassador program concept is something worth investing in, because that is a method for building relationships. And I think that that's what people want, is to know that we're a human being and that they can talk to us.
I think, yes, and I think too, to speak to that, yes, I love the ambassadors, by the way, that's my favorite part of the plan. But that said, I think the facilitation, it's why if we do any of these larger events, that we actually don't have to run anything, that we are sitting at the table doing those team activities, team building, group activities. I mean, yes, there are goals or there's specific work to it. And yes, it does have like this intention. It doesn't have this, but I think you can build in the time for that relationship building in a well-facilitated meeting. And there can be a component of those meetings that is purely social, where people in the room are just mingling and we're talking to one another. And that's hopefully, part of the goal of that annual meeting or any of those meetings is a social point. I want to just add, I did attend, can't remember if it was WASB or Coherent Governance Aspen Group specific about communication. Might have been WASB, in drafting of this and speaking specifically to public comment. So this also could be a place where we, again, like how much do we go in depth with this and define things? But I was shocked at the number of districts that either don't offer public comment at all, or don't say anything, don't have any established rules about public comment, about what's going to happen in a public comment space. But then also districts that actually have a follow-up protocol for all public comment. So there was kind of a bunch of different ways that I feel like public comment is approached across the state. And this, again, a question that I had was, is this a place where we outline how the board will utilize public comment? I don't think it is, but it could be. I think that was a WASB meeting specifically that I was on.
At least one of those coherent governance books mentions that in some cases there is some type of structured response or time for response to public comment. And I can't remember which one it is, but it doesn't matter. And again, I'm not proposing that we have to change the public comment specifically, but it is a practice that makes me think.
I hear you.
Is it doing what we need it to do? Does it work for us? And does it work for the members of the district who bring their body to this room and want to talk to us? Do they feel that they were heard? Do they feel like it was a meaningful use of their time when they do that? Again, maybe that's not the time for that conversation, but it's a thought.
So we have about 15 minutes left before we'll go to our debrief. We want to look a little bit and try to get some ideas about next steps or how we can continue to refine this. I would like to just take a chance to talk a little bit about the school ambassador program from my perspective. And this is one that we've had a fair amount of discussion about back and forth. I'm of two minds about it. When I get an invitation from a school to come and visit for an event, if I can fit it into my calendar, I try to go. I figure if they're going to invite me, then that means they do want me there and they are okay with the disruption. Every principal I've ever spoken to is say, oh yeah, come whenever you want. And I think they mean that. But at the same time, I know when they reach out or when a staff member reaches out, they are actively anticipating this is something that I want to be a part of my day or my students' day or that sort of thing. And I do like the idea of trying to build some consistency in with where those relationships develop. You know, if I attend and as we went for years of service, I said to myself, oh, my son's in 8th grade, he's graduating. I will try to do South. We built that relationship up a little bit. Commissioner Lyons had already signed up for it. So I said to myself, well, I'll do Robbins because my kids went to Robbins. Commissioner Lyons had signed up for it. So I said Memorial. Commissioner Lyons and I don't live that far apart. So our children went to the same places. He's building those relationships too. And so maybe having some of that structure to know that, these are my schools for this year, or maybe I think one idea that we talked about was having sort of a slow rotation through. So at least one, even if you serve just one term as a board member, you would have, at least one school that it might be yours for all 3 years and have time to build that listening. One of my concerns that I have talked a lot with Commissioner Zur about is the workload. The last 2 years, and some of that is the overall conditions. Some of that is, we said coherent governance will make our work more efficient, but it also will require more work. I am preparing for board meetings differently and more thoroughly than I did before. We're reading a lot more in the monitoring reports. I am concerned about the workload of any of this. How much will it add? In addition to staff time, I think before Terry started, when Maida was the executive secretary, one of the things we asked about the log of events was how would this impact you if you were the one, Maida, that was having to or input this or, and trying to be considerate of all of those workloads. I have some concerns about workload or what's the expectation? Are we expected to go to every event, every fundraiser, and that's a discussion that we can continue to have. So I just want to voice my concerns about if we were to do that. And again, I like the idea of having some of those things. I think there needs to be I would like to put as little as possible on board members. In addition, not because it's not good to be out in the community, but because this is effectively a volunteer position. The $2,000 stipend that board members get is a pittance compared to the hours you all put in already. I want to be sensitive to the fact that this is in many ways a volunteer position. So I have some concerns about that there. I also don't want to lose relationship that I've built at other schools over time. Over the time that I've been a board member, I've been invited to North Star many times. Principal Schooley has invited me to many things, and I know some of the staff members there. I've really enjoyed that. And if I'm not on that, I have some concern. How does it make other board members? Does it make me feel like I won't get invited there now because I'm not the ambassador? But I want to keep those connections built. And so those are, again, I'm of two minds on that. And I think that's something that I think we need to still refine as we talk about it and just think about more, how do we put this in play in an effective way that does some of the things. So I do think the annual meeting seems to be kind of a no-brainer. I know some districts are required to do such a thing because of the way they're structured, and it's different in the way that like we're legally structured as the area school district here. But I do think, you know, every other year, I think maybe when DeForest was sharing that with us, maybe it was you, Dr. Beeker, that said afterward, you know, that seems like a no-brainer, you know, kind of a big event like that. So that's one I think that we should definitely, you know, begin planning. But I just, as we go forward, as we think about who might work together on, you know, refining this, this is all recorded. I am of the opinion that social media is generally bad, and I don't like the idea of having to use it. When you said for the district, the newsletter, that might be a perfect job for the vice president or for the president. Board meet updates via social media will not be good role for this president. So I don't like it. I don't want to do that one. But obviously, I realize that social media is a tool that many people use, and it is not wholly negative. So, but I do have a personal objection to that one because I don't think it is a net positive for us. Those are some of my thoughts as we go forward on what these other things are. The roundtables I think are great. I do think keeping them to more annually does minimize that, gives us a chance to have that listening opportunity. You know, board members can always electively go to things if they want. I know you've been involved with the Hmong PTA quite a bit, Commissioners, and I know that those parents appreciate that. By way of that, are there any other bits of feedback, I guess, that we want to give on what are things to look at or to consider as we refine this going forward? And also, I'm sure the Commissioners would love to hear if there are, especially Dr. Farrar, Commissioner Clements, Commissioner Lyons, if you're willing to lend some editing or some, you know, drafting together. You know, Dr. Beeker or I'm sure could also help, but we've had, you know, I think moving it around to different bits helps us to refine, to bring forward again. Dr. Farrar?
Yeah, I would just add that I think these are matters of scope. And I think the issue of scope, especially with the ambassadors program, is something to spend time on, of defining the expectations there and making sure that they're reasonable ones. But even if it is something like, these are your 3 schools, you visit all 3 of these schools once this school year, or twice this school year, that's not insane as a responsibility, and it is a planned interaction for relationship building. And so I see value there. Again, I totally appreciate the consideration of workload and that we should refine the scope. I would be happy to work more with Commissioner Zur on the plan going forward.
I'd be happy to help.
Cut it off there because we don't necessarily need to have more publicly announced meetings, and we can, you all can, you know, refine and we'll plan to then, I think, come back. I think we had discussed either an agenda setting or just in general, you know, possibly there's time in the July meeting. We know that, you know, the second meeting in August, we'll have to set the question for the referendum for the fall. So we'll try to balance that. I do anticipate that there might be additional work sessions for the board coming up to that. So we probably still could hit this one in July again. So maybe make that a tentative plan as the 3 of you start to bat around ideas or refinements. We'll see where it goes. I'd like to make sure that we come back to this regularly until we can get something settled, because, you know, if we find the right scope, you know, for me, I think it would be nice to start some of that ambassadorship in the fall if we can, even if it's not that the whole plan is formalized, or perhaps we, you know, need more discussion on it to find what that right scope is as a group. You know, Dr. Johnson's not able to be here tonight to lend his voice. Other ideas or comments or questions for now Commissioners Zur, Lyons, and Farrar to take into sort of the next stages on this plan? Commissioner, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or point out?
No, I think it's, I'm very excited for it. I think that if we've learned anything these last couple of years, I think, at least for me personally, I feel that, that there does seem to be kind of that wall, I think that Dr. Farrar has talked about of how do I reach these people? That, I think that just gets frustrating at a certain point, right? And where if you show where the doors are, here are the doors, and here's how we engage, and here's how we are available in sort of those larger structured ways. And obviously we will always be available for an email or a phone call or whatever, right? Like that does never go away. But I think that because then our board meetings perhaps don't become the only venue by which people are heard, because it's not the best forum to have a conversation with a board member. And not that conversation leads to any action, but just that you can be heard, right? So, and at least try to move that to the right place, and the place where it can actually have an impact. And there's been multiple times where I've had connections from community members, something I cannot fix or solve, but just getting them in touch with the people who can they're so very grateful for that. And I appreciate being able to do that. And if I'm the gateway by which I get those folks to the right person, then great. Like they could also just call here, maybe, I don't know. So but there's where do we set up the boundaries of how we are going to be available for that dialogue? And then, but also, our results are such that they do need constant monitoring. Part of the results feedback was what is our community really looking for? What do they want us to achieve, right? When we go out and talk referendum, like, what is your big dream? Like, what do you want from the Eau Claire Area School District? Like, what can we do together, right? So I do feel like our results need our engagement, our strategic engagement with the community. So we do have to have a framework by which we do that. And I think Commissioner Lyons probably articulated it, the most clearly. And so I'm excited for this work, and I think that it could be really beneficial for us. And I think that we, again, with the policies, we've laid a great foundation. But also, I think with giving some structure, and having engaged with the board before I was a board member, it was scattershot how you networked in with board members and who you talked to. And then certain board members would say certain things, and you know what I mean? It was like a rodeo sometimes. So, I think that getting real clear and setting a good foundation, I think it's necessary. I think it could be one of the most important things, we do for the future of the district.
Thanks. Well, it looks like we have at least some idea of where we're going here, and we'll continue to work on it and bring it back here. So at this time, we'll move on to our regular board debrief. Our third member of agenda setting was not able to join us at the last agenda setting. So Dr. Beek, I hope that you would be willing to facilitate our regular debrief tonight.
Josh, I wonder if you might be interested in starting.
Sure. Well, thank you, Commissioner Bika. This was my first meeting attending virtually, and I thought it went relatively well. It's not preferable, but it was a good opportunity to stay engaged in this commitment, despite other things that I committed to do today. They got rescheduled and ended up being on a board meeting day. I thought that it was a little bit different change in that we were discussing the communications policy and something that's quite a bit more fuzzy than what has occupied most of our agenda for the last year in working through things in our governance model and referendum related things. So despite that, I thought that it was a very informed discussion about how do we advance the spirit of better communication, as well as how do we live within our skin of our governance model. And I thought that was a very productive conversation. I think it's raised a lot more questions that we need to continue to balance. But I'm glad that the direction that this is going in, and I'm excited that we're continuing to work on this, and it's continuing to call us into question how we work better, continue to work ever better within our governance model. Thank you.
Erica?
Well, I've had a lot of time to say my piece tonight, so, but I think for me, I just so appreciated you guys, student representatives. It has been a really wild year. And I feel like you guys saw democracy at its best, and at its most challenged at times. And I think you maintained composure. You, through all of that, it was challenging for us sometimes to keep our thoughts with us and to ask good questions and to be thoughtful with all that was going on. And I feel like you guys never blinked an eye. You just got right back in the saddle and kept on going with us. And I felt so grateful for your comments, for your questions. And I hope that when you go out into the world and you keep asking great questions, keep challenging people who are older and wiser than you. We're not necessarily wiser, and we have a lot to learn. And I hope that you will continue to help us older folks be better leaders for you and become leaders yourselves. So thank you for all that you've contributed. And to Sam, I don't know if Sam's still here, but to all of you, thank you very, very much for your contributions this year. It's been great.
Go ahead, Phil.
I would echo Commissioner Zer's sentiments. Sam, Aislinn, Reed, just outstanding job. Really well done. I enjoyed serving with you. I enjoyed hearing your comments. I really think you probably added much more in my mind than you probably think. So, I also think, I'm fully bought into coherent governance. I think everyone knows I struggle with the idea of not having committees. So this kind of discussion where we were really kind of free-forming some of the things around this communication plan, I think that's going to be a natural outcome of not having committees, because it's either work sessions or we're thinking about what we're doing in the full board meeting. So, I think you did a great job at a first draft, and I'm really happy to kind of add to it. But I think that that's probably an outcome. And I think that's a natural kind of evolution, and I probably good.
Commissioner Lyons, you got kind of to what I think we're both the strength and the thing that we need to keep working on. I think tonight is a demonstration of how a full board can dig into issues and work on it outside of the committee structure. And that was affirming to me, and thank you for sort of leading that presentation. And again, for all the work that you've done on it already, commissioners. The challenge, of course, is how do we maintain that as we go through? One of the many tasks that the president has, or at least I've taken on as the president, is to start working on the draft of our work calendar for next year. And I think I've expressed this a little bit, that I do see with year 2 of the monitoring that we will not have the regular first draft monitoring, which will open up significant portions I have spoken with Superintendent Johnson about sort of planning out the focus on results segments, but even in that, if we have a focus on results segment and a monitoring report in the same night, that still leaves us, a roughly 20-minute to half-hour open time, and that will be filled with some things that we'll need to do, but that should, even in the packed times, give us regular times to have, at least a half-hour brief discussion about some of these things going forward. So I think that's something that we need to work on, is how do we build this calendar and how do we continue to have this? But I think tonight sort of demonstrates, and I think the pencil plan, and we'll set the agenda on Wednesday of this week. So you'll get my agenda preview a day later than normal. We're going for a training tomorrow in Madison, so we won't have agenda setting. To do a similar board development style referendum workshop. And so we'll have this opportunity to model this again. And then as we look at it, as the referendum committee continues to work, maybe we do need to have that, because if we're doing regular planned referendums, then maybe that does need to stay in place, or maybe it waxes and wanes as needed, or maybe it can happen in the board. But this was really affirming to me to be able to have this discussion as a full board, to do this work outside of just the monitoring. And it's something we need to focus on to keep being able to do. Thank you.
So I do want to first just commend all the students for their work, but also for your comments tonight. I thought that each of the things that you shared were really meaningful, and they spoke to your ability to hold leaders accountable and to participate in governance already. And that's really inspiring to me. So I want to just thank you and commend you. And then secondly, with the process of the meeting, I think that the conversation we had about how we're going to have communication also demonstrated a kind of process that some members of the public have been asking for, which is that they want to see us deliberate. They want to know why we vote in a certain way. They want to know how we arrived. And I think that the conversation that we had back and forth, including sharing reservations and questions and issues about scope and the boundaries of coherent governance, all of that, I think, was useful. And I know not a lot of people are going to watch the meeting, and that's fine. But for those who do, and for those who read about it in the paper, that there is a conversation that we are having in public, and that there's deliberation, and there's back and forth, and there's reasoning, and there are questions, and there are answers, and it's a process that makes sense, so that when we arrive at our communication plan, it's not going to be something that came out of the ether, like, where did this come from? When did you make this? I think that that's a question that's been coming from the public a lot. How did you get there? Why did you make that choice? How did that vote? Why did that vote go that way? And that this kind of conversation can facilitate those answers, because more of that conversation is happening for the public record. That's what I would say.
It does feel good to get to the end of this, closing on the end of the academic year, and as far as, okay, we've been through this full cycle now, and to see that what else the meetings are going to look like. It's exciting. Something that I think we could do better, and I do worry a little bit about now that we've made it to this point. What will we need to do so that coherent governance, so that we stay as current with it as we have over the past year, and it doesn't become some books that collect dust on the shelf, and we almost like become distant from it. And I think a way to do that is what we're trying to do is every meeting, no matter what we're talking about, is connecting back into the policies, always referencing the policies and keeping those out in the forefront. And I know that I don't think that I'm doing as good of a job of that as I can. So I'd like us to be always doing. To the students, Phil and I had the pleasure of, we were out for today, we had a marathon day together all day, Phil and Lori's show, doing interviews at North and Memorial for next year's student reps. And I really, as I sat there and talking with them, and I really thought of of you all. I mean, I've had the, you know, the great fortune to work with several like really, really good student representatives. But my thoughts like, you know, drifted to you a lot of the time. So I will miss you very much and thank you and best of luck to everything you do.
Thank you, Dr. Beacon. Thank you again to our student reps. At this time, I would hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.